Hello, comrades. Welcome to weekly Palestine stream. And today we will be discussing the essence of China and various arguments used by the defenders of the so-called Chinese NAP. My name is Vasily, and I will be accompanied by Comrade Brooklyn.
Hello there.
Hit the like button, subscribe, and support us by clicking on the link which you can see in your left bottom side of the screen, stream.palesturm.com. Right, and now we will go to the plan of the stream. The first topic that we want to discuss today is China imperialist? One of the main arguments used by the defenders of the PRC is that they appeal to the symbols. They say, look, they have a red flag, they have the Communist Party leading the country. Isn't it obvious that China is for socialism? Brooklyn, what can you say about this?
Well, it's one of those things where it's a little bit hard to believe how it's a good justification. They have a red flag, they have a communist party. It must mean that they're socialist. Just signs can be misleading, right? So, um, previously in the 19th century, capitalists portrayed revolutionaries and social democrats as criminals, anarchists, utopians, all sorts of delusional, pie in the sky type nonsense. That's the way they described socialism. And socialists. Uh, and at the turn of the century, as the 19th became the 20th century, these leaders of this movement, the union leaders and party leaders, were being bribed, being integrated into the bourgeois political system, encouraging ideas of compromise and unity and national solidarity, or as we would call it, like true revolutionaries would call it, class collaborationism. The idea being that you can achieve socialism by coming up with agreements with the bourgeoisie as like some sort of business deal. And in the First World War, this bore fruit. Social democratic leaders uh, talked a big game when it came to the revolution. They said before the war started that we will make war on war. And then when the war actually started, they betrayed the workers. They sided with the bourgeoisie of their nation. They banned any strikes. They offered support within parliaments to governments. They, entered governments in national unity cabinets, and sending millions of the betrayed working class to kill each other for the interests of capital.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and these social democratic leaders called themselves communists. They waved the red flag. Some even spoke of revolution from time to time, even though most by then had even forgotten what that word meant. Um, it's clear that these people were not socialists, they were not communists, they were not Marxists. Um, so looks can be deceiving, and
Mm-hmm.
just because China might have a red flag and it has stars and is ruled by a communist party, um, and declare themselves to be Marxists and Marxist-Leninists, that doesn't mean anything. They can build all the statues they want to Mao, um, and they can talk a lot about Marx, but ultimately they never get in down to the nitty gritty. They always distort and ignore significance. Most of his theory, and if they do use it, they use it to justify uncommunist policies. Let's say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would add that this is one of the features of our time. Unlike in the previous century, when social democrats were mostly using socialist rhetoric and they were still afraid of different symbols, today we can see that capitalists are openly sitting under the red flag. They are open members of the so called Chinese Communist Party, and of course, they declare loyalty to Marx, while, of course, in reality, naturally distorting significant parts of his theory. Another common argument is among yeah, another common argument among defenders of China is their appeal to the size of the Chinese Communist Party. They say, do you consider nearly 100 million Chinese communists to be fools? At least corrupt officials are executed, and this means that there is a socialist order in the People's Republic of China. What can you say on this topic?
I mean, that's something you do see a lot with social chauvinists. Do you think you're smarter than the 100 million Chinese communists? It's it's a nonsense it's a nonsense thing because who's to say that they're all communists in reality? Are you to say that not one of them is an opportunist or a careerist? I mean, if opportunists infiltrated the USSR, why isn't that the case in China? Why is it not even more so in China, which has allowed the expansion of private property to a degree that was never present in the USSR ever, allowing them to enter the party and make decisions. What does isn't that if even a small fraction of that 5 or 10%, that's a serious concern, isn't it? Careerists and bureaucrats will are found in every at every level at that point, surely.
Mm-hmm.
And they rewrite it to suit their own means. So Deng Xiaoping uh, said famously, what was it that let me bring it up here. Deng said, "It doesn't matter if the color of it doesn't matter what the color of the cat is, as long as it catches the mice." Or Jiang Zemin's three represents, all sorts. They come up with all sorts of slogans to justify their reforms. But if you just peel back the curtain, you can see that it's clear um, that the people behind these slogans justifying these policies are doing it for a reason. They want to mask what they're really doing: the expansion of private property, the accumulation of capital, capitalism, generalized commodity production, and all that. And so, if you look at the end at the end of the history of the USSR in the last century, the CPSU, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, had 2 million members. It still collapsed. It's important to note that it doesn't matter how many millions of members you have. You can have 500 million members. What if 409 was it what if 499,999,999 of them were all opportunists and careerists? Doesn't mean much on the size, does it? Stalin said that there's a quote we have here of arrogant armies, and I think it's perfectly applicable for this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he said, "You cannot console yourself by saying we have 1 million members in the party, 2 million in the youth league, and 10 million in the unions. Thinking this ensures final victory over the enemies. History teaches that the largest armies perish from arrogance, overestimating their strength, underestimating the enemies, falling into complacency, losing combat readiness, and being caught off guard in a critical moment. The largest party can be caught by surprise. The largest party can perish if it doesn't heed history's lessons, if it fails to forge its class's combat readiness day by day. Being caught off guard is the most dangerous thing, comrades. Being caught off guard means falling victim to surprises, succumbing to panic in front of the enemy, and panic leads to disintegration, defeat, and death.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that really says it all, doesn't it? Sure, they execute a few corrupt officials here and there, but that doesn't decrease significantly the numbers of bureaucrats, careerists, and just capitalists in general. As in other capitalist countries, this is just this. They're merely trimming the leaves. Let's say they're attending to the symptoms. But what causes this corruption? How is it that in a socialist country you can have corruption on this magnitude? This isn't just fudging production quotas or pocketing public money. These are millionaires and billionaires. This wasn't possible at all in the USSR. How is it possible in China? What causes this level of corruption? Capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Thank you. Though I think the audience can interpret these words as like we're denying the existence of corruption in the Soviet Union at all. Of course, this is not true. The corruption existed. However, objective reasons for this included the legacy of the old regime, of the Tsarist regime, the lack of experience, because the Soviet Union was the first state to be building socialism, to be going through all these difficult stages. And of course, this resulted in a decent amount of people who pursued career in the first place, of corrupted officials. But even if we compare this amount to what we have currently in China, it's like earth and sky. The current corrupted Chinese officials are penetrating the state apparatus. They are using any means possible to promote the interests of corporations, and these exist in China. It's a well-known fact, and even staunch defenders of the PRC cannot deny this fact. Xiaomi, Huawei, numerous global corporations are in China, and of course billionaires. There was no such thing as billionaires in the Soviet Union, and PRC has one of the largest amounts of billionaires on the whole planet. If I remember correctly, only United States surpassed them in the amount of billionaires. All right. Hello to everyone who joined us recently. Today we're discussing the topic of China, debunking common arguments of the defenders of Chinese capitalism. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you have not done it before, and support our project by clicking on the link stream.polishtstorm.com. You can see this link in the YouTube chat. Another thing that defenders of China use is that, in their opinion, Chinese expansion cannot be equal to the American one. They say what you call expansion is not expansion at all. Sometimes they say it's a mutual prosperity and enrichment, and they claim that Chinese don't behave like Americans or European imperialists. Well, in reality, they actually do, and there is even more. Examples vary from Africa to Russia. We can include Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Taiwan, and Central Asian countries. The key point is that indeed China uses the same methods, the same approaches, even those that were used actually against China 100 years ago. And it's not a question of justice or prosperity or enrichment. It's just capitalism. It's just imperialist expansion. Numbers are quite various, and I think we will be just send in several links for our articles where you can find some more detailed analysis. Here is, for example, an article on Chinese debt trap imperialism. Debt trap was broadly used by American and European imperialists, and we can see on numerous examples that Chinese capitalists apply the same thing. Another material which can be read is how Chinese capital subjugates Russia. It's a common fact. Even Russian capitalists accept that Chinese business is not like a friend, but more like a partner. And just like any business partner, they don't have any sentiments, they only have interests, and they follow these interests. And another thing that is usually raised is that the defenders of China compare the currently existing regime to the new economic policy. They say, they simply have their own NEP and they develop productive forces for a transition to socialism. It's simple. Berkeley, how can you approach this argument?
Well, I mean, at some point, this new economic policy has to end, but it won't end in sight. I think that every year when the congresses of the legislature meets and the government makes its speeches outlining its program and policies for the next legislative session, the pronouncements of the central committee or the presidium, I'm not sure exactly as to the terminology that is specifically used, but the higher organs of state power frequently announce the importance of expanding and deepening the reforms, meaning that even though it's been close to almost 50 years now of this new economic policy that they say it has been inspired by the USSR and the massive expansion of the economy and these productive forces, the development of which has reached an incredibly high level, higher than the USSR had in certain sectors. It's clear that they have no intention of ending this quote unquote new economic policy. And this was the policy of the right opportunists. That's what they wanted in the USSR in the 1920s. So those represented by Bukharin and others who allied with Trotsky to attack the Marxist-Leninist policies of the government of the USSR in the 1920s and 30s wanted to pursue this. They wanted to pursue the NEP for decades longer. And as we know, the longer this would have gone on, the more powerful these germs of capitalism would have become, and it would have developed into capitalism at some point eventually. The slogans, enrich yourselves. We can't build socialism right now. We must open the market wider to capitalists. This is the exact same positions that the right wing opportunists had in the USSR that had to be removed from their positions in the government and from the Bolshevik Party, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, excuse me, because by pursuing this line, it would have allowed private production to expand, private property to continue to exist, capital to accumulate, and a new bourgeoisie would have formed, risking the revolution. And it goes without saying, for those of you who maybe, I would say it goes without saying, but for those of you who aren't too aware of the history of theory and the importance of Leninism, Marxism, Leninism, it is in the refutation of social democracy and class collaborationism. This is the same thing that the right-wing opportunists said in the USSR, which are being said now by people who support the Chinese capitalist policies. were the exact same justifications the Social Democrats used, the opportunists and the revisionists used to attack the USSR. They said that socialism couldn't be built in the Soviet Union because it was too backwards and the productive forces just weren't there. There weren't enough proletarians. Lenin said, "No, you're wrong, and here's why." And better than that, he proved them wrong. How is it acceptable that we criticize these people but we accept it for China? One has to be right.
Mm-hmm.
The situation is almost laughable, in, and shows the general lack of knowledge about what even is socialism. They just, circling back to our first point, they just assume that there's a red flag and there's a communist party, so obviously this is communism. How?
Mm-hmm.
What are you talking about? But yeah, and this is unfortunately the case now. You have the PRC, it goes without saying, Vietnam as well, and many other pseudo socialist states and movements all parrot this line. And this line was refuted 100 years ago. So they
Mm-hmm.
have no theoretical or ideological justification for this.
Thank you. I would like to add that one of the features of the new economic policy was that it was indeed, yeah, that indeed it was a retreat. However, it was a very brief retreat, and Bolsheviks accepted. They never tried to camouflage it. They openly said, yes, we're retreating, we're accepting some capitalist relations in some spheres of economy. Uh,
Yeah,
and yes,
to
and
destabilize the economy and society. It
mhm,
was always a temporary thing.
yes, and it it didn't take them too long. It actually took about from 4 to 5 years to accumulate those forces, even in the backward country like the former Russian Empire. And Bolsheviks managed to prevent the creation of a large bourgeoisie, and they did not allow small and medium capitalists to enter the country's governance structures to get into the actual Soviet power. And of course, the Soviet Union did not become a part of the global capitalist market. On the contrary, the Soviet Union uh, had the foundations of the worker state preserved, and this is what allowed them to successfully construct socialism. While on the contrary, in China, well, yes, you can kind of say that in China there is NEP, but we can only add that this would be the NEP if the Soviet Union had right-wing opportunists winning in the 1920s, because the slogans there were basically the same. For example, Bukharin said numerous times uh, for peasants to enrich themselves. There were different uh, slogans like "we cannot build socialism, we must open the market wider to capitalists." All these things are said and implemented in China today. And yes, this is what the failed NEP would look like. Instead of building socialism, USSR would be turning into literally modern PRC. And yes, as it was mentioned, this is one of the main errors of opportunism. Opportunists sacrifice the ultimate goal for today's successes. And in our case, they are turning capital accumulation for building socialism into the main objective instead of constructing socialism itself. And therefore, gradually turning into capitalists themselves.
This is a criticism I think Lenin had of Kautsky and the other Social
Mm-hmm.
Democrats. I can't remember the full quote, but I think it goes something like, "For the Social Democrats, the opportunists, the movement is everything, but the revolution is nothing," or something like that. What's more important is winning elections and saying this or that, but ultimately doing nothing. It's the movement that's important, rather than socialism for them.
Yes.
And again, you can see the parallels here between the social democrats and the opportunists and the modern day Dungists. So
Mm-hmm. Yes. The quote you're referring to was about them saying that movement is everything and the goal is nothing. While for Marxists,
That's it. Yeah.
yes, the goal is everything and the movement is subjugated to the goal.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. You have to
Mm-hmm.
reach the goal somehow. And that's what the movement is. The movement
Mm-hmm.
isn't a separate thing.
Yes.
But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Again, greetings to everyone who joined us recently. Today we're discussing the current state of China, Chinese capitalism, development of China, and debunking common arguments of defenders of the PRC. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you have not done it before, and support our project by clicking on the link stream.polishstorm.com. You can ask us a question online and we will respond right here and right now, or you can simply support our project, support our organization, supporting Marxist-Leninists from Russia, from former Soviet countries, from Europe, from the United States, and help our work in reviving the international communist movement. And another common argument of the defenders of the Chinese capitalism is that they claim that we don't know the full situation inside. It's a common thing. You can say a lot of about Chinese expansion, about Chinese opportunists, and they usually try to overthrow all your argumentation with a phrase that all you know comes from bourgeois sources and your minds have been brainwashed by Western propaganda. Now, how can you approach this question?
Well, I mean, it's again, that's I mean, first of all, the people who say that sort of stuff in defending the PRC, in a way, are themselves operating from bourgeois propaganda. They're insinuating that China, with a billion citizens, is this sort of walled off nation that no one has access to. That's absurd. You can very easily find Chinese people on the internet. You can go to China. You can also read the CCP's own publications. Again, they're not this secret cabal of people, and we don't know what's going on. We read what they say, what they publish. I mentioned briefly earlier about the fact that every single Congress they have and every single legislative session and every single pronouncement from the government all talk about expanding this. And funnily enough, we also have a quote from I don't have the tones here, so this is probably pronounced very badly. Liu He, the vice premier, the deputy prime minister, essentially, or vice president of the PRC, the Davos Forum, the annual meeting of all the world's biggest imperialists. He said this last year, excuse me, in January, we must always make the creation. We must always make the creation of a socialist market economy the direction of our reforms. We must allow the market to play a decisive role in resource allocation and let the government play a more active role. Some say China will aim for a plan. Some say that China will aim for a planned economy. This is absolutely not possible. We will deepen the reform of state-owned enterprises, support the private sector, promote fair competition, antitrust policies, and entrepreneurship. This is no different to something that would come out of the Republican or like Democrat Party in the United States. He's talking about we need to privatize more and we need to support the private sector. He speaks about the market playing a decisive role in resource allocation. What does that mean? Don't we? Is that any different to how we operate? The people who have the best resource acquisition, that is, people who can get all these resources in a market system, are those who have the most money. So what he's saying is, in China, the reforms we want to make means that if you means that the market, the using the market to divert resources really means using the market to keep resources away from people who can't afford them and keep it all for people who can afford them.
Mm-hmm.
That's just capitalism. It's the rich can buy whatever they want because they have the ability to procure it in a market, whilst the poor have to make do with whatever they can afford.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't sound very socialist to me. And this isn't the first time this has happened. I mean, um, I don't have the link, unfortunately, at hand. If we did, we could have put it up. But you can find it yourself. You can Google it for yourself. Very recently, the Xi Jinping himself said in front of all the gathered deputies and Communist Party members that there was Mao made the mistake of following the class conflict theory. We have learned from that mistakes. He said basically something like that. He said that in China, they do not follow the idea that there are two classes in capitalism: the working class and the bourgeoisie, and that they're in conflict with one another. He says that this is actually very wrong. And you know who he said it to in the audience as well? It was very shocking when I found it. Klaus Schwab, the head, was it the head? Oh no, sorry, the head of the World Economic Forum, one of the most influential imperialists in the world. This guy runs the world economy. When we talk about America and the Western powers behaving imperialistically, this is the guy who manages that essentially. This is the guy who gets all the bourgeoisie and imperialists together and decides on how to cut taxes for the rich and take away funding for the welfare state and things like that. He was in the audience when Xi Jinping said that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very clear on which side the Communist Party, the so-called Communist Party of China, is on.
Mm-hmm. One of the notable things is that those different capitalist mass media, especially European and American ones, they openly accept that China is simply capitalist, and when they do reviews of this, they're completely fine with this. And sometimes even liberals point that China has this red flag, sickle, and hammer, but in reality they behave just like other groups of capitalists. So it's not a secret for capitalists themselves. They only use it to fool the masses on both sides. If we speak about Europe and United States, about Western audience, it's mostly used to portray China as socialist and claim that these things they do, this is socialism. Because in the West, the word socialism is something very, very bad. We all know about that. And on the other side, social chauvinists use this term to describe China because they try to basically fool people that just being another type of imperialist means socialism. Like if they're less aggressive in their imperialist expansion, this is socialism, which of course is wrong. Socialism is not about imperialist expansion. And of course, socialism is not about doing big corporations and becoming second in the number of billionaires per country. All right. Again, greetings to everyone who joined our stream recently. Today we're discussing the topic of China, debunking different arguments of the PRC defenders. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you have not done it before, and donate to our organization by clicking on the link stream.padishturm.com. For better use, it was duplicated and sent in the YouTube chat. And now one of the topics that we want to speak about is some of specific examples of Chinese imperialism. Well, globally, First of all, we have Russia, Central Asia, and former Soviet republics. And as one being from Russia, I can actually explain how does it feel to be the target of Chinese economic expansion. So one of the first things that I can say is that a Russian reorientation towards China has partially taken place, and it only continues to deepen. For China, Russia represents mostly a market for cheap raw materials. For example, there is notable gas pipeline called the Power of Siberia, which is used for, well, transit of gas from Russia to China. Currently, there were plans announced to make a second gas pipeline, which would be called the Power of Siberia 2. Plus, we can add traditional Russian export of timber in China. And of course, Russia is a large consumer market, especially since after the events of February 2022, Western companies withdraw from Russian market. So, for example, Chinese cars, once a rarity on the Russian streets, are now commonplace. Before 2022, if there was a Chinese car on the streets, everyone would be like, wow, that's something exotic. And now they're basically everywhere. Though their quality leaves much to be desired, they are very expensive. And, well, it's still Chinese cars. They cannot compare with the Western ones in terms of quality, in terms of being made for Russian specific features, for Russian climate, for Russian roads. They break a lot. One of the funny things was that recently Russian capitalists announced the legendary Moskvich series to be reborn. However, in reality, it turned out it's simply Chinese cars with Moskvich symbols put on them.
Because I wanted to ask,
Mhm.
excuse me for interrupting. I wanted to ask, wouldn't that mean that whatever company that is or factory that is producing these cars, wouldn't they have to pay money to the Chinese government to use their designs? Because they must be patented, right?
Yes, I don't know how specifically they solved this situation, but I think the issue is that this Moskvich is manufactured in Moscow from basically packs. China sends some car parts and they are assembled in the car. And this is how it becomes Moskvich.
Right, right. That's very imperialist. As for those of you who might not be aware, most of the stuff that you think comes from one place isn't from that place. Most olive oil isn't Spanish or Italian; it's Algerian or Tunisian. Most cars, very famously, aren't from whatever country they're from. They're mostly produced overseas and usually finished in a third country, and that's the country that can say, I made it here. Which is why when you buy Italian olive oil, it's not Italian, it's Tunisian. It's bottled in Italy, which means it's made in Italy. But that's the trick. That's how imperialist nations make and these large monopolies make massive profits. They most of it is made in a country where it's cheaper to make, and then it's finished in whatever country they say it's from. Famously, Guinness, very famous Irish beer, not made in Ireland. Asahi, very famous Japanese beer. That's a lot of bourgeois British people like to have. Made in Manchester in England, not from Japan. Same with Peroni, a very expensive Italian beer made in the UK. It's not Italian. So they behave just like any other capitalist company, capitalist nation.
Mm-hmm. I can also add that since Western products have become more expensive in Russia due to sanctions, they're being replaced by Chinese brands like Xiaomi, Huawei, other brands I would say that Xiaomi, for example, positions itself as part of what's now called so-called ecosystem, because they offer not just phones but also various household appliances, clothing, some other things, electro cars recently, uh, and
Well, it's probably why
mhm.
it's probably why China wasn't, if you guys can recall, when it happened, when the sanctions were imposed and Russia was cut off from the world market, essentially, China didn't really say much because they knew that they could profit from it. And it's the same as in any other conflict or situation. A lot of people attack NATO for destabilizing Libya. China didn't say a word when they started bombing Libya because they would profit from the cheaper oil. Same with Russia. If these nations are anti-imperialist, it seems that they're very selective with, who they against whom they are anti-imperialist and whom they are not.
Mhm.
And it just goes to show that they take part in the imperialist system just as much as the Western countries do. They sell weapons to the Israelis. Uh, they've stopped now, but they still send agricultural equipment, which I think a Palestinian news organization. I think we reported on this actually. So check that out if you haven't already. Check out our content. These machinery, excuse me, they were drones. Yes, these drones which were used for agriculture and therefore couldn't be sanctioned have military applications. So, China says that they're friendly to the Palestinians, whilst at the same time they're making money from the IDF killing Palestinians.
Mhm. Uh, yes, we have covered this topic, the how China profits from the current conflict in Palestine and how it sends drones to IDF in our recent material. It's called Communists and the Palestinian Question. The link is in the chat. Uh, we strongly advise you to read this material after the stream. It has a lot of important information, especially related to China. And of course, as mentioned above, this is how basically every imperialist behaves, like trying to make profits out of a conflict between two sides, standing upon them, supplying each of them with things necessary, and simply making profits. And if we get back to Russia, I can say that, well, yes, they expand the Russian markets, but at the same time, they don't provide any significant assistance to Russian capitalists. They are keeping its distance. And very often, China takes a neutral stance. They repeatedly state that China does not support Russia on the Ukraine issue. Their initiative of resolving the conflict is basically being for all good things and against all bad things. Plus, very often Chinese banks block Russian transactions. They don't allow Russian citizens to go through Western sanctions, and very often they simply deny any transactions at all. Like they say that they're supporting international law and they're supporting the sanctions. Plus, recently I've read an article from Russian business journal, and there was a long part of it about, again, Chinese capital being not a friend but a partner. And this means that, yes, they see if they profit from cooperation with Russia, they do it, but they are not friends. And they actually do all the things that usually capitalists do to outmatch their competitors, using dumping, using different things like monopolization, cartels. All of this is applied in Russia too, and Russian capitalists are already cautious. Like, yes, thank you for switching sides, for helping us to fight the sanctions, but it's getting too much. And, well, that's obvious why it gets too much. It gets too much because it's imperialist expansion. There is nothing they can do about it. So this is more or less situation with Russian and Chinese relations. Again, another notable examples of Chinese imperialism include Sri Lanka, where they bought a port for 100 years, just like the United States did last century. We have a big article on Myanmar, which explains Chinese interests there. And another important thing is Taiwan. Chinese government usually claims that they want to get Taiwan back because it's a part of Chinese territory, but reality is very simple. Taiwan is responsible for a large part of semiconductors production on the international market, and this is why China needs Taiwan. It's like the words about reunification, about justice, etc., are only form, and the essence is just simple imperialism, just as usual. Again, the link is sent in the chat. Feel free to read the articles after we finish the stream. You can see more information in our materials, and I think we will also discuss them on our next streams. Again, greetings to everyone who joined us recently. Today we're discussing common arguments of defenders of China, explain Chinese capitalism and imperialism. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't done it before, and support our project by clicking the link stream.polishterm.com. It's in the chat.
If you don't mind, sorry for the interruption. I hope you don't mind. Looking at the chat here before we move on to and the next theme, staying on the the expansion of Chinese capital globally as part of its imperialist aims. I see here that one of the viewers has asked our position with the Belt and Road Initiative and the distinction in Chinese methods. No forced austerity, billions written off. Well, Mr. Whoever you are, however you say it, European imperialists do this. American imperialists do this all the time. Usually, when billions are written off, it's because they know that they can't ever get it back, and they need to give the whichever country more loans. So in this way, it won't cause political problems from the central bank that says, why are you still giving them millions and billions? They haven't paid it off and things like that. No forced austerity. That's not exactly true either. Very often, in order for the nation that gets these, in quotation marks, benefits, usually us, like most imperialist projects, or even with within a country, you have maybe a construction project, like you're renovating your house or something like that. All of a sudden, the contractor, in this case the Chinese, slaps you with a huge bill that you then have to pay. How do you pay that off? You have to cut public funding. You have to balance the budget some way in order to start paying it. If you can't, the Chinese then will get other concessions from you. Free trade areas, more land to build factories and things like that. And you would say that, well, this is expanding the productive forces. Isn't that a good thing? Expanding the productive forces for whom? Like for who? Excuse me. It's not these aren't state-owned industries. These are owned by either local capitalists who exploit their own working class, or they're owned by Chinese capitalists who just open up a factory in another country. Oh, but they're providing jobs. Well, then we can say America provides jobs when they open up factories in Nigeria. Europe is providing all sorts of jobs in North Africa with their investment. you have to look at what is the class nature of these investments. Who profits from this? And it's very rarely the locals. Of course, they have better roads and public transportation for sure, but eventually these will be privatized because that these are still capitalist countries. Eventually, it'll have to be privatized. The developmentalism isn't socialism. If that were the case, then uh, France in the 1800s was socialist because they built trains. That's not how socialism works. Socialism isn't when you just build things. That's if that were the case, the colonies of Europe were socialist. They built trains and railways all over Africa and Asia. Isn't that
Hmm.
socialism?
Yeah,
It's not exactly a very strong point to make, in our opinion.
yeah, we actually have this argument just uh, a few points later to be debunked. It's a common thing.
Oh, is
So
that right? I jumped the gun. I jumped the
yeah,
gun.
yeah. I think we can actually start with this. So again, just as written in the chat, one of the main arguments of the defenders of China is that China cannot be compared to Western imperialists. The latter are much worse, while PRC and its allies are more progressive. Usually, they try to attract attention only to some certain instruments, like, for example, the United States actively uses armed aggression, while China is mostly using economic ways of imperialist expansion. But still, it's only certain instruments, and if we're speaking about the essence, the general structure, they can absolutely be compared. China and its Belt and Road and its BRICS structure, it's still a bloc, and it's still economic expansion. It's still pushing workers of different nations into servitude. Of course, the United States and Western countries have more experience in plundering. They have done it for longer historically, but this doesn't mean their opponents are inherently better. China has, for example, alliances with infamous Taliban in Afghanistan. They have alliance with Russia, and I remind that Russian capitalists are literally those who destroyed the Soviet Union. And now they even are in alliance with the Saudis. Recently, Turkey applied for BRICS membership. So, well, now they will become allies with Erdogan, who is well known for his uh, Ottoman nostalgia. And at the
Yeah,
end,
he's invaded Syria.
mm-hmm, yes,
Everyone
yes.
says that Syria is a victim of Western imperialism. Erdogan has invaded Syria. There's a big part of the north is occupied by Turkey. Does that mean that China and Russia will have a problem with it suddenly? I very doubt it. I think they'll change their opinion very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And again, as it was referenced before, of course, we can kind of say that German Empire's colonies could not be comparable to the Belgian ones or the horrors committed there. Uh, if you want, Google what happened in Belgian Congo about Heart of Darkness, and you will see. And yes, German Empire's colonies were not like this, mostly, but that did not make German imperialism at the time like, any sort of better. It's not about, again, choosing lesser evil, it's about characterizing both sides as they are. And if we apply Marxist theory to the current sides of the global conflict, we can see that both are imperialist camps, and despite some difference in the instruments and some spheres of influence, they're essentially capitalists, imperialists, and they pursue their imperialist interests, resulting in the redivision of the world and conflicts. Another thing that is usually raised in relation to this argument is that people accept that China is capitalist, but then they claim that it's still not imperialist. What can you say about this?
Oh, that's still capitalist but not imperialist. Well, the thing is, a lot of people make the mistake that imperialism is when you're aggressive and you make war and you try to make an empire, imperialism. But in that is a very surface level uh infant an infantile way of uh looking at imperialism. You're looking at the symptoms, not the root cause. And this is, you mentioned it earlier, and I wanted to say that you can't understand imperialism without looking, because imperialism is a set of policies, right? Or at least the people who make the mistake of thinking that imperialism is just when a country is aggressive militarily. Um, that's not the case. That's just a symptom. What is the symptom? You have to look at the economic basis of it. You have to look at it from a class perspective. That's the importance of Marxist theory. If you don't, you are just siding with one or another bourgeoisie, because the bourgeoisie has fought liberatory wars. A lot of countries in Eastern or Southeastern Europe had revolutions and wars of national liberation, and they fought against, the Ottoman Empire, for example. Um, by our logic, they're anti-imperialists, right? Because they're liberating people. But the thing is, you're not looking at it from a class basis. Who was it that benefited the most? Of course, the people there did benefit, but it was the bourgeoisie. If you don't look at imperialist wars nowadays, you make the mistake of thinking that the interests of the bourgeoisie are the interests of the working class, and you can see it nowadays. We've reported on it again. Check out our social media. We've reported, and the bourgeois media doesn't report on this. They haven't reported on it at all. You have to actually dig for it to find it. But at the moment, there's a massive war going on in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo against M23 rebels. Who are M23 rebels? They are essentially an army funded and trained by Rwanda. And Rwanda right now has taken over very important mines in Eastern Congo that are crucial to creating semiconductors for telephones and computers. If Rwanda takes control of these areas, then they have control of a very important part of the world market. Isn't that imperialism? Well, some people say, well, they're trying to liberate it from the American imperialists who oppress the Congolese. But do you really think that the workers there will benefit from this? Do you really think that the Rwandan workers will benefit from this? It will be owned privately. And so you've just swapped one bourgeoisie for another. And if you're not looking at it from a class perspective, then you make the mistake of supporting one bourgeoisie against another. And I think that just because China doesn't have aggressive policies, doesn't military policies, doesn't mean that it isn't imperialist itself. Because what is the basis of this? Like I said, it's the economic system. That's why the bourgeoisie wants those mines in the Congo. Um, it's the system is one based on monopolies and the control of significant portions of the world market in order to keep up their rate of profit. This is the defining feature of imperialism. Lenin said in Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, that it's a mistake to think that just because a country doesn't go to war, it is an imperialist. There were plenty of imperialist countries that didn't go to war in the 20th century in Europe. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, they never had huge colonies. They never had big wars of aggression, but they still had capitalism. They still had monopoly capitalism, which necessitates the integration of the whole world into this system of exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to whitewash China as a lesser evil is a mistake, because if they're capitalists, if we agree that they're capitalists in this scenario, then their capitalists are just doing the exact same thing. They want to expand their monopolies. They want to expand their market share. They want to expand their exploitation of other people. Just
Mm-hmm.
because they don't go to war doesn't mean that they aren't imperialists. They and eventually they stop finding ways of expansion, and that's when wars start. So just because China isn't aggressive now doesn't mean it will be soon. What if one day a country that is very close to China says, no, we will nationalize Chinese companies and industries? Do you think that the Chinese would just let them do that? If they're capitalists, if they're operating on market principles, as we've discussed, if they're operating off the profit motive, I'll let you decide that.
Mm-hmm. Plus, I would like to add that imperialism is often incorrectly reduced solely to aggressive expansion. However, economic penetration and subjugation have always been parts of imperialism as well. And if you frame it this way, then you're simply trying to whitewash China and find a lesser evil, just as usual. Plus, I often see that Western audience claims, you cannot compare China to America. Obviously, America is much worse. All right, see, I'm living in the country that was previously influenced by Western imperialism, and now it's influenced by Chinese imperialism. What are the changes? Right, previously we had Western capitalists profiting from exploitation, profiting from price range, profiting from cheap raw materials, from just market. And now it's basically the same, but for Chinese. Chinese capitalists are also profiting from cheap labor, from cheap market, from cheap resources. They're doing basically the same. And having Xiaomi instead of Samsung or iPhone doesn't make any difference. Just like it doesn't make difference that Russian gas was in transit to Europe and now it's more in transit to China. It's the same. And if you're trying to impose, you must feel the perfection of Chinese co-prosperity and friendship, then congratulations, you're social chauvinist and you betray the principles of proletarian internationalism. In this case, I think you're not a communist, you're just a guy who enjoys sickle at hammer, red flag, and doesn't care about the essence of these symbols.
Absolutely, it's something we discussed in our a previous stream. Check that out. Again, shouting out the YouTube channel about this, yeah, people treating socialism, communism, and the fight for the liberation of the working class as just aesthetics. They look at the red flag and the hammer and sickle, and they're like, yeah, they don't actually know anything about it. Um, and it's just it's delusional to think that oh well, if we have Huawei instead of Samsung, then it's better. How exactly? Well, it's cheaper. Well, maybe, but it'll get expensive eventually. Because they need to keep up their profits. It's really hypocritical as well. You brought it up how all these formerly colonized nations that are still dependent on the main imperialist powers. Some people would call it like the core, and that's an okay term, I think, in this situation. And they keep them in a level of poverty in order to keep these raw materials cheap. China benefited so much from this, and they continue to do so. Just because they build a few roads and railways here doesn't mean that it's they're helping them um, develop. It's this development is just so the market becomes more integrated into, and this is why it's so important. Imperialism is a world system. It's a global system. It's the whole world economy. It's why you can buy a McDonald's almost anywhere in the world, except for where you live right now, Vasily. But it's the same thing. It's just meat inside of a bun with some chips. Um, but if you don't recognize how imperialism is a world system, that there are different imperialist blocs that they still cooperate with each other. Everyone knows that the Americans were still trading with the Nazis up until they declared war. Even though that they were sort of against each other, it was very clear that America favored Britain and the countries that were at war with Nazi Germany didn't stop them from profiting because it's a world system. And I think this is the mistake A made again about it's preferable to have the national bourgeoisie in your own country. Absolutely wrong, because this assumes that the national bourgeoisie isn't integrated into the world market. They absolutely are. They will switch sides if they can benefit more, because like any bourgeoisie, they seek to expand their monopolies. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean that it makes no sense for the bourgeoisie to gain control of its own market and then raise the standard of living for the working class. That's absolutely nonsense. If the bourgeoisie of a nation gets control of its market, they will use the low development, the low wages to expand their influence in the imperialist system, because it's a world system. Like I said, it's these monopolies do cooperate as well as come into conflict. You can see this in all over the world. Again, you should read some of our material on this. And that's the mistake a lot of people make, this idea that um, only a certain group of people or nations, excuse me, are imperialist. No, imperialism is a system. There are different blocks, but they all work together in one world economy.
Hmm. Well, that's all true. Uh, as it was mentioned, we have a big material on the false anti-imperialism, which can provide you enough useful information, and this will supply our point of view. Well, I think at the end we can say that China is imperialist state. It has its own bloc. It pursues imperialist policies. If we speak about challenging the current order, well, yes, it challenges the current order. However, the situation is twofold. On the one hand, they're moving towards another global array division, but on the other hand, the imperialism of both blocs and their contradictions create spontaneous movement against it, and the task of the communists in this situation is to expose this falsehood, especially since the PRC hides imperialists under the red flag. It openly sponsors social chauvinists. It attempts to turn the communist movement into its appendage, and the task of the communists is to oppose all these things and to organize based on Marxist-Leninist theory and on fierce fight against any deviations, against opportunists, against revisionists. Brooklyn, do you have anything to add on this topic?
I think that we covered everything. I think that it's very important to listen to what the Chinese themselves say. As we've discussed, they are not going to create a socialist planned economy. They are very against it. They are integrated into the world capitalist system, imperialism, just as every other major economy is, just as every economy is, excuse me, major or minor. And because of that, it's a huge mistake to think that if we support China, this will somehow create socialism for us. It's just capitalism with a red flag. That's all it is. Swapping out one hegemon for another without changing the system is pointless. And as the Chinese have said, they don't want to change the system in their own country. Why would they want to change the system worldwide? I think that really sums it up.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And well, I think we will be ending the stream. Again, big thanks to everyone who joined our stream today. I hope that our stream will help you in discussions with different social chauvinists, with defenders of Chinese capitalism, that our stream helped you to uncover some specific points and problems about China. Again, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and of course, join the ranks of Marxist-Leninists, fill the application form, and join our common work. The link is in the chat. Click on this, fill the application form, and we will get in contact with you. Again, thank you for joining in, and see you next week. Goodbye.
See you all. Goodbye.